So, good afternoon, everyone. Now, yesterday we were talking about. Yesterday we were talking about Mysore, and talking about Mysore, we were talking about the Anglo-Mysore Wars, right? Now we have talked about 1, 2, 3, and 4. I told you that the coalition was formed between the regional players in the second Anglo-Mysore War. A coalition was formed headed by Hyder Ali in the second Anglo-Mysore Wars, but it broke down by the third war, right? This coalition saw the Marathas and Hyderabad joining hands with Mysore against the British. But this coalition broke down because Marathas signed the Treaty of Salabai, right? Marathas signed the Treaty of Salabai with the British, and after this they withdrew from the coalition after 1782. Hyderabad withdrew from the coalition because Travancore, a friendly state of Hyderabad, was annexed by Tipu Sultan. Okay? So a friendly state of Hyderabad, Travancore, was annexed by Tipu Sultan after coming to power, and this had convinced Hyderabad that it was only a matter of time before which Mysore under Tipu Sultan will become a threat for Hyderabad as well. And partly because of the death of Hyder Ali also, this coalition broke down, and you see that the third and the fourth war saw Tipu Sultan. The third and the fourth war saw Tipu Sultan forces battling the regional powers along with the British alone. Now, in the third battle itself onwards, Tipu Sultan's forces had started suffering defeats and had started losing out on territories. Okay, and this got accentuated by the fourth war. Where you see there is the Battle of Srirangapatnam, right? This is the Battle of Srirangapatnam, right? And it was in this battle that Tipu Sultan's forces, which are surrounded by British forces in his fort capital of Srirangapatnam, and he has two options: either to surrender and sign a subsidiary alliance, or to go ahead and actually continue the battle. But at this point of time, he refuses to sign the subsidiary alliance. He refused. Volume. अंदर volume बढ़ा दीजिए वो कह रहा है. Is it better now? No? More? So, is it audible now? Back. Okay. So, in 1799, he refused to sign the subsidiary alliance, and this refusal to sign the subsidiary alliance ultimately led to his death on the battlefield. And you see that the empire of Tipu Sultan, or the rule of Tipu Sultan, comes to an end. After this, the Mysore empire was reduced into a landlocked state. Okay, landlocked state. All the coastal areas were taken off control by the British. Okay, given that this was crucial for them to having a port access in the region and for continuing the trade in pepper, cardamom, silk, etc. from the region. So this is the reason why Mysore was reduced to the status of a landlocked state at this point of time, and was now placed again back under the Vodaya dynasty, which had ruled Mysore before Hyder Ali. So, but they signed the subsidiary alliance. Now, but why did Hyder Ali refuse to sign the subsidiary alliance, etc.? The first important thing, there was a question this year also on subsidiary alliance in your prelims examination, and we'll discuss, details of the subsidiary alliance policies, also how we will see, and this is something that I'm telling you here itself, but I'll elaborate on this later, is that what is, ऐसा question means में आ सकता है, that what was the British policy with respect to Indian princely states, okay, and the evolution of British policy with respect to Indian princely states, the evolution of British policy with respect to Indian princely states during the 18th and 19th century. Okay. So what did the British do to negotiate with the Indian princely states? We'll discuss in more detail later, but I'm just giving you a context right now, a broad overview. If you want to draw, you can draw this with me in the side as a rough thing, okay? But because we'll keep coming back to this again and again, is that in Bengal, what do you see? In Bengal, during the 1760s, what do you see? The British establishing dual and indirect rule, right? We had talked about this after the Treaty of Allahabad, right? Diwani rights, etc. Then, what do you see is that another manifestation of continuing this indirect rule is also something that is visible in the idea of subsidiary alliance that we will discuss right now. Okay. Subsidiary alliance was also a way by which the British were establishing their indirect rule. So the British were establishing their indirect rule again with the use of subsidiary alliance as a strategy, by which they did not intend to completely displace the local ruler, but yet keep increasing their influence and presence in the region. Okay. Now what were the features, etc., we'll see. So even this is a indirect rule, okay, of the British, and this starts from 1798 onwards, and it goes on till 1817. Okay. This is in 1760s, right? This is in 1798 to 1817. Then we will see that the British introduced what was the principle of paramountancy. By the principle of paramountancy, the British now said that the interests of the British, political and economic interests of the British, are paramount or the most important. And they said that if anything happens which had a negative or a detrimental effect on the British interests, then given that British interests are paramount, and if there is any threat to British interests, then states can be annexed, or Indian princely states can be annexed. Why did they adopt this principle? All of that we'll discuss later, but मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ. This happens from 1815 onwards. Then in 1850s, in keeping with this principle of paramountancy, they talk about the policy of annexation, one of which is something that you all know, doctrine of lapse. So that we'll see in 1850s, Dalhousie, etc. Then after 1857, in 1858 onwards, the British introduced a policy of subordinate union and isolation. Okay, that all of that we'll discuss later. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a gradual evolution from indirect rule. When you see the policy of annexation, it becomes what? A threat of direct rule. In 1857, the British Crown assumed the responsibility of administering the Indian colony directly. So what is happening? From gradual coming as a trading organization to gradually maintaining indirect rule during the end of the 18th century, and to the beginning of the 19th century, threatening direct rule, and in the mid-19th century, involving the policy of annexation. Do you see a gradual evolution? Okay, so this is the evolution they'll ask about. Okay. So one should have a broad picture, ताकि मैं आपको बार-बार बताऊंगा तो आप समझ जाएंगे कि अच्छा अभी ये हो रहा है. Okay. So that is a gradual evolution. Again, that changes after 1850s also. We'll talk about उसके बारे में बाद में. Okay. This is just one gradual narrative that you must be ready for. See, most of the questions that when they'll come, at least from this area, what questions come are direct, fairly direct. Beyond this, whatever comes in the mains examinations, especially 1800s and 1800s and 1900s is very indirect. Okay, and this is also sort of an indirect question, okay, which will require you to have an understanding of the whole period, and in one question they can test it whether do you understand the evolution of the policy or not. Because if you don't understand, you will either begin from subsidiary alliance, or you will forget one or two in between and you jump to the other. Right? So if you can draw the whole picture, there's nothing like it. Okay, so that is there. Is that much clear? But just remember that policy changes again after 1857. Policy changes, and we'll talk about it later. Okay. Now, this much also is a context. Now, let's talk about subsidiary alliance. Okay. Now, talking about subsidiary alliance, one of the first things to know is that the subsidiary alliance was also one of the ways by which the British were to establish their indirect rule. It was Lord Wellesley who brought in the concept of subsidiary alliance 1798 onwards. One of the first states to sign the subsidiary alliance was Hyderabad in 1798. In 1799, it is Mysore which signs. In 1801, it is Awadh. In 1802, it is Marathas which sign subsidiary alliance. Okay. Now, why or what are these are some facts. Okay. But what are the features of subsidiary alliance? That is what we are more interested in. And उसी पे question आया था, क्योंकि मैंने हमेशा बोला है कि ज़्यादातर questions you will find even in your prelims are factual, but a bit of analysis is there. It's not that they will ask you arrange them in the order which went through subsidiary alliance. Okay, arrange them in the order A, B, C, D. Okay, that kind of question won't come. Like the question which came this year. Okay, that one of the things that you see with the subsidiary alliance is that the objective of the subsidiary alliance was that it's an alliance. Alliance meaning between two players or more than two players. Now, alliance often involves give and take. Koi alliance ho. Any alliance involves give and take. And this is, the subsidiary alliance is actually a military alliance. Military alliance by which the British are offering something to the Indian rulers. The East India Company is saying that whichever state signs a subsidiary alliance with us, then they will be offered a military guarantee of protection against any other regional state. So in case Hyderabad signs a military alliance and it has long-standing disputes with Marathas and Mysore, then Hyderabad will get a military assurance that the British troops will be stationed in Hyderabad, and British troops will be stationed in Hyderabad, which will protect Hyderabad against any attack from its adversaries in the region. Okay. So it was to offer a military guarantee to Hyderabad. If we are talking about Hyderabad, as it was the first, so let's talk about Hyderabad. Okay. So it offered a military assurance to Hyderabad. How? That British troops will be stationed in Hyderabad. British troops will be stationed in Hyderabad, but who will pay the cost for the maintenance of British troops? Hyderabad, right? Dekhe, one of the things is that there is going to be a give and take. So if British troops are going to protect Hyderabad, then in that condition, the cost for maintenance of British troops will have to be paid by Hyderabad itself. Okay. Now, this should lead to a fairly direct question. If the Hyderabad has to pay the cost for maintenance of British troops, why not maintain its own troops? Why should you depend upon the British for maintaining troops if you anyways have to pay the cost? Because when the British were maintaining troops in the region, it did not come as a blank check that, okay, Hyderabad, you are going to pay for the British troops, so now British troops, use the British troops to attack Mysore, to attack Marathas. It's not that given that British troops will be stationed for the defense of Hyderabad, Hyderabad could now launch wars left, right, center against everybody. Okay, kya baat batate hain? Okay, because we have British troops. No, the control of the foreign policy was to rest with the British. No war could be declared without the consent of the British. So it's not to give them a blank check. Okay, so no war can be declared without the consent of the British. It is only when they are attacked that automatically the troops will come into force. But to declare an attack, you require a consent of the British. And so this was, in a way, the British were getting a control over the foreign policy of these states. Secondly, also the British imposed a condition that in case the states are unable to pay the in case the states are unable to provide the finances for the maintenance of British troops, in that condition, certain regions could be granted as a Jagir to the British. So, for example, if Hyderabad is unable to pay the cost for maintenance of British troops, then Hyderabad will grant a Jagir to the British, with which the revenue generated from which will be used for the maintenance of British troops. Also, with the subsidiary alliance, one individual of one British official will be stationed in the court of Hyderabad, and he will closely monitor whatever political and economic policies are being formulated. So, in terms of the domestic policies of Hyderabad, though autonomy belonged to the king, but these policies were also closely monitored by the British. And obviously, needless to say, the trading monopoly continued in these regions for the British. Beyond this also, the subsidiary alliance, according to the subsidiary alliance, the British imposed another condition, that whether it is the declaration of war or whether it is the signing of the treaty, peace treaty, to end the war, all will happen with the consent of the British. Also, apart from this, to ensure that the French do not, establish a toehold in any of the regions again, every country, every state which signed the subsidiary alliance with the British imposed another condition under this system, that no French or no other European individual will be employed except the British. A large number of French individuals who were still working in Hyderabad in 1790s, all of them were removed from the court of Hyderabad after 1798. So even this was a condition imposed. But ultimately, what you see, why are the British keen to sign? Okay, these are the conditions. But why are the British keen to sign such a treaty? The British are keen to sign such a treaty because of two reasons. Firstly, the British do not have to take up the day-to-day administrative responsibilities, and this is the British East India Company, right? The same reason that we had seen why are they interested in indirect rule in Bengal, partly is also the reason why they are interested in indirect rule in Hyderabad. That they are saying that they are primarily economic. Their primary interest is economic, and to secure that economic interest, they need to maintain army. But beyond that, there is no interest in taking up the administrative responsibilities of the state on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, they want to leave the local rulers with enough autonomy and privileges that they do not revolt against the British. देखिए, if the British, and देखिए बड़ी simple सी बात है, गठबंधन इसे कहते हैं, right? Is that if the British were to displace the rulers of Bengal, if the British were to displace the rulers of Hyderabad or Mysore, then all these disgruntled princely rulers who were denied their privileges or their power completely, what can they do? They will only revolt. So what are they interested in doing? In cultivating them as a junior partner in British rule. Mughals cultivated Rajputs as a junior partner. They did not displace the Rajputs, again because displacing the Rajputs would mean constant trouble with the Rajputs. Similarly, the British are not completely displacing the local rulers, rather they are leaving them with enough powers and privileges intact that they do not, that they have a fear of losing something, and they have enough power and privileges that does not make them so desperate that they revolt against the British. Is that point clear? Is that point clear? कि they want to leave the local rulers with enough privileges कि हाँ आपकी सल्तनत बनी है, आपकी dynasty बनी है, you still have privileges, you still have your palaces, you still call the shots on domestic policies. Not all powers are being snatched away from you. You do not have any reason to revolt. Also what they're saying is that we are offering you assurance. We are offering you assurance that we will protect you from the invasions of neighboring states. So one of the reasons also why subsidiary alliances are being signed is because of the internal differences or because of the bitter differences between the regional states. Because ultimately the British are saying what? We will protect you against other neighboring states. If the neighboring states would have had more solidarity, then if the regional states would have had more solidarity, in that context, what would have happened? Probably there would not have been a need for a subsidiary alliance with the British. Agar Hyderabad is not having any military conflict with Mysore or with Marathas, then where is the need for a subsidiary alliance? Right? So, all of these subsidiary alliance system is becoming possible because of the differences between the major regional players. Is that point clear? Now, but even then, this was a very unequal agreement. Though it offered certain benefits to the local rulers, it offered much more benefit to the British. How? Because the British are keeping a close watch on the economic and political policies. The British have a say even on the foreign policy of these states, and most importantly, the British are financing the maintenance of their troops in the region at no cost to themselves. Bengal, Battle of Plassey and Buxar, Treaty of Allahabad, we talked about what? That the revenue generated from here was used to finance further expansion. Now, in subsidiary alliance system, the British are asking Indian states to pay the finances for the maintenance of British troops in the region. So, the East India Company and the British were smart enough to, from the very beginning, ensure that the costs of their expansion or military maintenance in India is partly being recovered from India itself. Okay? So, this is something that subsidiary alliance importantly provides them. It is reducing their economic burden and allowing them to maintain their troops at no additional cost to them. This is ingenious. This is amazing. Okay? So, it is very significant. But if, again, the question that arises is that if the Indian states have to pay for the maintenance of British troops, why not maintain your own troops? They are not technologically that advanced. The point remains that ultimately the Indian states were not willing to sign the subsidiary alliance because of this reason. That without, if they had to pay for the maintenance of British troops, they would not have enough finances left with themselves to maintain their own troops. And they would completely depend upon the British troops. That is not a very healthy scenario, because the independence of the ruler will get compromised very seriously. But not signing the subsidiary alliance would risk continuing the war with the British. Signing the subsidiary alliance would at least regain some autonomy, even though their dependence on British for military strength or for military support is increasing drastically. So that is why Tipu Sultan is not keen on signing the subsidiary alliance, because it involves giving away significant control and power to the British. It would permanently make Mysore dependent upon the British for military support, and it would lead to a situation where he cannot maintain his own troops. Because why? Because it is expensive to maintain troops. Just to give you a context, India's GDP expenditure on defense is how much? 3%. 3% roughly is India's GDP defense expenditure. 1.6. You push that up with pensions and other things, that becomes 3%. Okay? So, one is capital expenditure, one is salaries, pensions, etc. You put all of them together, that becomes almost 3% of the GDP. Now, 3% of India's GDP expenditure is huge. Just to give you the context, that India's education and health expenditure put together is also not 3%. Okay? So, we spend more on an army than on education and healthcare of this country put together. I am not saying whether that's good or bad. I am saying yes, there may be requirements of preparing for a two-front war, this, that, etc. But just to give you the context that it is vastly expensive to maintain military preparedness, and that was the case here also. So, you see, they do not have any ability left to maintain their own armies, or that does not mean that they did not maintain any army of their own, but the size of their own armies was vastly diminished. Only a couple of thousand soldiers they would maintain. The king would still maintain a couple of thousand soldiers for their own immediate needs, but not a very vast army. So, all of that is about the subsidiary alliance. It becomes another way through which the British further strengthen their indirect rule in regions like Hyderabad, in regions like Mysore, in regions like Awadh and Maratha. All these regions, basically, you see that they are entering into subsidiary alliances. Is that point clear? So, आपसे question ऐसा भी पूछ सकते हैं वो that one, they can ask you a question about the evolution. Secondly, they can also ask you discuss that the subsidiary alliance system represented a key element of British policy towards Indian states in the 18th century. Discuss its impact on 18th century India or 18th century India. So, you must know the key features of subsidiary alliance and what is its impact. Is that much clear? Any doubt still here? हाँ. So Vodaya dynasty is being reinstated after Tipu Sultan's death, primarily so that there is a local ruler, which is anyways who have been the historical rulers of who have anyways been the historical rulers of Mysore region, and more importantly who enjoy little or no bargaining power against the British, right? So that is the reason. Okay. Anything else? And the Vodaya dynasty signed the subsidiary alliance. Okay. So anything else you want to ask till here? Clear? So you write down firstly the Anglo-Mysore war and the causes of the Anglo-Mysore war. We had written about the administrative structure of Mysore, right? Now we'll write about firstly the causes of Anglo-Mysore war, and then about impact also, and subsidiary alliance system also. Okay. So the causes of Anglo-Mysore war. See, we are not writing the timeline here, क्योंकि timeline से ज़्यादा important in this context. I have told you what is there. I have told you the reasons also why alliances were formed, why they are broken. उसमें से कोई कुछ नहीं पूछेगा. Okay? पूछना कोई नहीं है, लेकिन वो आपको बताना है, इसलिए जरूरी है ना, स्टोरी में मजा नहीं आएगा. कहानी में मसाला का है. So that is the masala, but nobody is going to ask you. The question is only going to be on the discuss the causes of the Anglo-Mysore war. We will write about the events in the causes itself. Okay. That is it. So, firstly, the first cause is the territorial expansion sought by Mysore under Hyder Ali from 1760s to 1780, or to be more precise, from 1754 to 1782, and Tipu Sultan from 1782 to 1799 aimed to take control of the western and eastern coasts below, or western and eastern coasts below the Krishna River, sought by Mysore under Hyder Ali, and Tipu Sultan sought to take control of the western and eastern coast below the Krishna River to become the preeminent power of southern India. This brought them into direct territorial conflicts with Hyderabad, Marathas and Travancore. Moreover, what happens? That moreover, these expansionist aims partly triggered the formation of regional alliances or regional alliance of Maratha and Hyderabad with British in the third and fourth Anglo-Mysore wars. The third is from 1789 to 92 and the fourth is in 1799. Everybody's written this? The second point is the British perceived a key threat to their economic and trading interests in the region. The British perceived a key threat to their economic and trading interests in the region. As under Tipu Sultan, during the 1780s, Mysore firstly disallowed under Tipu Sultan, during the 1780s, Mysore firstly disallowed Indian states from sorry, my bad, you are sharp. So Mysore, thank you. You know, what happens at times is, मेरा दिमाग कहीं और चल रहा था लिखते हुए. Under Tipu Sultan during 1780s, Mysore disallowed the British East India Company from using ports under control of Mysore for trading activities and subsequently banned or prohibited native traders from maintaining any trade links with British East India Company. This adversely affected British East India Company's trade in pepper and cardamom from the this adversely affected British East India Company's trade in pepper, cardamom and even silk from the region. The third reason is the British suspected a collusion between the French and Mysore and saw this as a potential threat to British presence in the region. The fourth point so as a potential threat to the British presence in the region, that the French may join hands with Mysore to have a negative impact on the British presence in the region. So that is there. And the fourth point is what? The fourth point that ultimately triggered the outbreak of the Anglo-Mysore Wars is what? Is the fact that the centralized state of Mysore and the centralized state of Mysore and its expansionist aims could not hold on to the regional alliance established under the centralized state of Mysore with its expansionist aims could not hold on to the regional alliance established under Hyder Ali. during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, and thus, despite its relative military prowess in the region, it could not sustain itself against the larger regional alliance established by British with Marathas with the Treaty of Salabai in 1782, and Hyderabad following the annexation of Travancore by Tipu Sultan. Clear? So these are the causes. Now what is the impact? In impact we say one is the subsidiary alliance, and we'll write about the subsidiary alliance in more detail also separately. But one is subsidiary alliance, that ultimately you see that Mysore is forced to sign the subsidiary alliance. Now after this, if you see, everybody's written this? Okay. So after this, if you see, one important thing happens, and this is a major consequence, okay, that what happens after this is that you see in this region that Bengal already the British have a indirect presence, right? Hyderabad is signing the subsidiary alliance, and so is Mysore. Now this only leaves which state in this, which major state in the region? Marathas. Now Mysore has also signed the subsidiary alliance, Hyderabad has also signed the subsidiary alliance, and Bengal already they have a indirect presence. So what do you see? That the Marathas are now surrounded by allies of the British, directly or indirectly from all sides. Okay? And this means that the noose is now tightening around the Marathas. Okay? And with the fall of Mysore, the last major formidable challenge to the British is actually falling. In the sense that if anyone in 1790s had the potential of challenging the British in this region, it was Mysore. Not just because it held territories, but because it had a modern army. See, ultimately we'll see Marathas fall later to Mysore. However, Marathas' defeat was only a matter of time. In the sense that once Mysore fell, Marathas' time was anyways limited. And Marathas were already past their peak after the third battle of Panipat. Okay? So Mysore was still a very strong state, and thus the decline of Mysore meant that after the decline of Mysore, there was no formidable challenge left to British in India from the regional Indian states. And by the turn of the 19th century, or by the beginning of the 19th century, by the beginning of the 19th century, you see that it now seemed more than ever that the British rule was now seeming to be imminent by the beginning of 1800, as Mysore also enters into the subsidiary alliance. That is the significance of the Anglo-Mysore wars. Is that point clear? Okay. So, let's just quickly write down about the impact, and then we move on to discuss what. Now, after this we discuss Marathas, right? We've discussed everything in this region except the Marathas. And Marathas itself is a fairly lengthy topic, given that Marathas also ruled for a fairly lengthy time, right? So, in the sense that Marathas, the 18th century, if by any power had the largest territorial extent in India during the 18th century, it was the Marathas. The 18th century and especially 1720s to 1760 is the golden age of the Marathas. Okay. So, that is why it's a fairly important thing. Questions have been asked from Marathas before also. They asked the question why so many battles were fought in Panipat. In 2014 they asked the main question that why so many battles were fought in Panipat. There are other questions also, causes of Anglo-Maratha wars, etc. they can ask. But before that, let's just quickly write down about the impact. First, Mysore was forced to sign the subsidiary alliance system. Mysore was forced to sign the subsidiary alliance system and thus cede indirect control to the British in the Mysore signed the subsidiary alliance system and thus cede indirect control to the British in the region. The fall of Mysore represented a significant milestone for British presence in the region, as the significant milestone for the British presence in the region as the last major challenge to British in South India gave way. And the second impact is following the fall of Mysore, Marathas were surrounded by British allies that is Hyderabad, Bengal and Mysore from all sides, and this made a conflict inevitable. This made a conflict inevitable. About subsidiary alliance, basically, what are the key points that you must know? About subsidiary alliance, what are the key points that one must know? I'll rub this. Written? हाँ, बताइए. Yeah, any doubts still there? Please. Yeah. Yeah, so we are saying that Mysore is signing subsidiary alliance. Tipu Sultan is not ready to sign subsidiary alliance. That is why he gets killed in the war, right? Ultimately, Mysore is forced to surrender. Now, the Vodaya dynasty is already out of power. If they do not sign the subsidiary alliance, they will not come to power anyways, right? If Hyder Ali and if Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan cannot keep the British out of the region, then there is no chance that Vodaya dynasty can keep them out. Ultimately, the Vodaya dynasty can either accept limited coming back to power with limited say, or not coming back to power at all. The British would find somebody else to place on the throne, right? So it is not something that any of the regional states were very keen on signing these treaties. All these treaties were signed under the threat of a war or after a war. Okay, so it's not that any of the states is keen. We'll talk about Marathas also signed. They also signed under a war. Okay, so in that context, none of the states is willing or keen to sign because the treaties are unequally favoring the British. That is there. Clear? So you will definitely find somebody. ठीक है? ऐसे आप देखिए कि for example the position of the president in India is not a very powerless. It's not a very powerful position, but it is also not a very completely powerless position either. There are certain constitutional powers with the president, those selective, but they are there. But then one could say that why would you choose to be a president when you can be a prime minister? But it is a question of options there, right? What options, if given a chance, everybody would want to be a prime minister, not the president. But what are the options that are there at anybody's doorstep, right? Subsidiary alliance. So, subsidiary alliance, Lord Wellesley introduced it. I already told you that Hyderabad was the first state to sign it in 1798. At least this much fact you must remember. 1799, Mysore is signing it. We'll talk about other states separately. Okay. Now, you see what are the provisions? The provisions of this is that the British troops would be stationed in the court of Hyderabad. The British troops would be stationed in the court of Hyderabad. We are talking about Hyderabad as an example. Okay. The British troops would be stationed in the court of Hyderabad would be stationed in the court of Hyderabad and would protect it or would provide protection and would provide protection against regional adversaries. And would provide protection against regional adversaries. For example, Mysore and Marathas. Second, the British would have a say in the foreign policy of Hyderabad as no declaration of war, as no declaration of war or conclusion of peace treaty could happen without British consent. Third, the cost for maintenance of British troops in the cost for maintenance of British troops in the region or in Hyderabad would be paid by the native Indian, would be paid by Hyderabad or by the native Indian state. Thus, the British indirectly finance the maintenance of their troops in the region from the revenue of Indian states. To further from the revenue of Indian states, to further British presence, to further British interests, in the region. To further British interests in the region. Inability to provide finances for maintenance of British troops inability to provide finances for the maintenance of British troops could inability to provide finances for the maintenance of British troops would result in forcing Indian states a jagir to the British. The revenue collected from the revenue collected from which the revenue collected from them would be used for this purpose. And last major point is that for this purpose of maintenance of troops. Okay. So, but it's not that they have to give any, any proof to the British, to the Indian states. So once, for example, the northern sarkars, which was anyways granted as a Jagir before, it is now permanently granted as a Jagir. It is now permanently granted as a Jagir to the British in Hyderabad. It was initially granted as a Jagir after 1766 itself. Now it is given permanently as a Jagir to the British. The revenue generated from northern sarkars would be used for maintenance of British troops in Hyderabad region. Okay, so that was there. Fifth, the treaty prohibited Indian states from employing any other Europeans except the British in Indian states. Primarily aim to keep France out of the, or the French officials out of the region. So we can say in terms of a conclusion that what is the impact of the subsidiary alliance? We can say in terms of a conclusion that the impact of the subsidiary alliance is what? Firstly, it is strengthening the indirect rule of British in the region. Secondly, it was a highly unequal treaty. It was a highly unequal treaty. Which Indian states were forced to join reluctantly under threat of war, and thirdly, it compromised the control of native states over foreign policy, over their foreign policy and their ability to maintain their own standing army. Converting them, it compromised the control of native states over their foreign policy and their ability to maintain their own standing army, converting them into a subordinate partner of British in the region. Subordinate partner of British in the region. Clear? Any doubts still here? Not finding it fast? Still fast? Okay. How many are still finding it fast? ऐसे देखिए कोई आप ही की क्लास है, जिसने की शर्म उसके फूटे करम, है ना, शर्म करने की जरूरत नहीं है, राइट. The only thing that Indian parents need to teach to their kids is being besharam, because society is anyways going to teach you sharam. The only thing that society can teach you is sharam, so you should be besharam. Okay. So anybody wants me to slow it down further, wanted me to repeat? नहीं, ये that is not acceptable. Late आए तो घर जाके देखिए. If you not understood, then you want me to repeat, then I'll repeat. So because interest माइनॉरिटी का भी इंपॉर्टेंट है, लेकिन मेजॉरिटी का भी है. मेजॉरिटी भी खा जाएगी मुझे, वरना सर आप तो okay, chillax. Okay, now I'll answer your questions. Now the next thing that we're going to talk about is Marathas, and Marathas is a very important topic from your examination point of view. Subsidiary alliance, there was a question this year, and we'll discuss some previous year questions of prelims examination also. We'll discuss thoda aur ho jaye course, then we'll discuss previous year questions and also how to eliminate options, etc. Because prelims examination is not about knowledge. Prelims examination is about being smart, okay, and being smart involves not knowing the right answers. It involves knowing what is not the answer. In most of the questions, I am telling you, next year also prelims is going to be this way only, as it was this year and the last year, that most questions you will not know the correct answer, but what it requires is applying your mind in the exam and eliminating options. The more options you eliminate, the more are the chances of getting a right answer, and that is what is required, and which is required more so in current affairs based questions, but even in some questions of subjects as well. Okay, so it is why knowledge can take you as far. It also requires a good amount of common sense and practice, actually, in the sense ki when you look at the past 5 years question papers, one of the approach is, one thing is to, when you look at the question papers, don't jump to the answer. Answer is the last thing that you must be concerned about at this stage. When you see questions right now, you should only see which areas they are coming from. Okay, and read the question. No need to read the answer. No need to पीछे पलट के आंसर देखने की कोई जरूरत नहीं. क्वेश्चन पढ़िए, ऑप्शंस पढ़िए, ये देखिए आपको आता है क्या, नहीं आता है. नहीं आता है कोई बात नहीं, यू जस्ट स्टार्टिंग एनीवेज राइट नाउ. व्हाट यू शुड बिकम फेमिलियर इज, अच्छा देयर इज समथिंग ऑन प्रेसिडेंट्स रूल व्हिच वाज आस्क्ड, ताकि जब प्रेसिडेंट्स रूल आपकी क्लास में डिस्कस हो रहा है तो यू नो, अच्छा इस पे तो कुछ पूछा था, ये इंपॉर्टेंट है. So one thing that it does is it makes you familiar with what kind of areas are being asked and what kind of questions are being asked. Does not need, you did not need the answer right now. Second thing is, once you have read the topic, then you look at the question, then the habit is to find the answer. The habit must be to eliminate options. Okay, and you will slowly and slowly by practice pick that up. Okay. Also, one of the things is when people do prelims, either test series or questions etc, तो लोग बोलते हैं कि 15 टेस्ट या 10,000 क्वेश्चन करें मैंने. आप अगर आपने 10,000 क्वेश्चन करें प्रीलिम्स के पहले तो आप हैं बेवकूफ, कोई यूज नहीं है. अगर आप समझदार हैं तो आपको 300 क्वेश्चन देख के समझ में आ जाएगा हाउ यू मस्ट एलिमिनेट ऑप्शंस. And because 10,000 questions were not asked in the past 5 years, and pattern keeps changing every 2-3 years, okay, not even 5 years. So that is more than enough. You should learn to eliminate options and learn to be wise, okay, and that will happen with practice. I'll tell you, when we'll discuss questions, we'll see those questions. तो आपको हर question में answer नहीं ढूंढना है, हर question में ये ढूंढना है कि अच्छा, if I would have been in this place, what should I not have committed? Or this is how I should have approached. Approach is important rather than number. Okay, हमारे यहाँ क्या होता है, importance is number. हाँ, तूने कितने साल किए, तूने 3 ही किए, मैंने तो 5 के किए. आप 3 में भी सीख सकते हैं और आप 5 में भी नहीं सीख सकते. And more importantly, the more backwards you go, all questions will become more and more factual. Okay, and factual questions are very rarely asked these days. Okay, so yes, ancient history, art and culture, some areas are factual, which have remained factual, but largely they'll not ask very factual questions these days. Okay, for example, they used to ask once a question in 2007 and 8, ki which of these states have does not have a high court of its own, है ना? ऐसा क्वेश्चन नहीं आएगा आज के टाइम में. अगर हाई कोर्ट पे कोई क्वेश्चन आना होगा तो पूछेंगे एक्सक्लूसिव जुरिसडिक्शन ऑफ द हाई कोर्ट डज नॉट एक्सटेंड टू विच ऑफ दीज इश्यूज. तो फैक्चुअल क्वेश्चंस आर नॉट आस्क्ड, एंड दैट इज व्हाई स्टेट सर्विसेज और यूपीएससी का पैटर्न अलग है. स्टेट सर्विसेज में प्रीलिम्स में पेपर आर मोर फैक्चुअल, यहाँ नहीं है. सो ऐसा नहीं है कि आप ज्यादा फैक्ट्स रट लेंगे तो आपको कुछ हो जाएगा. अल्टीमेटली इट हैज टू बी analysis and also eliminating options. That is it. Okay. So let's now go ahead and discuss Marathas. Pardon? I did not get you. What? Which war? Mysore wars. So you think write about the war, what happened in first war, second war, third war. वो पावर पॉइंट प्रेजेंटेशन में लिखा है, आप जाके पढ़ लीजिएगा. कोई मैंने आपको बता दिया और आपको पता है और वो पावर पॉइंट प्रेजेंटेशन में दिया हुआ है. नोबडी इज गोइंग टू आस्क यू टू राइट दैट इन द एग्जाम. ओके, एंड अल्टीमेटली यू नीड टू नो द कॉजेस ऑफ व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इन द वॉर. पहली क्लास में थे आप, घर जाइए पहली क्लास देखिए. आई विल नॉट रिपीट. मैं पहली क्लास में सबसे पहले यही बताया, इसीलिए मैंने पहली क्लास में बताया कि क्या बुक्स का क्या अप्रोच रखना है और क्या अगर पढ़ना है तो कौन सी बुक कैसे पढ़ना है. घर जाइए देखिए, उसके बाद भी डाउट है तो मेरे से क्लास के बाद पूछिए. आई विल टेल. ओके, so that it does not waste time here. Okay, now when we talk about Marathas, what we basically see about Marathas is three important topics. One, and this is very important, believe me, this is something that they will definitely ask, because Shekhar Bandyopadhyay has written extensively to point out that how in 18th century India, if one kingdom or one empire had the potential or the ability as well as the opportunity to form a pan-Indian empire, after the Mughals it was the Marathas, but yet they failed to do so. Why? So they will ask you a question like this, that to what extent it would be correct to argue that despite both the opportunity and potential, the Marathas failed to establish the pan-Indian empire in 18th century. Discuss. Okay, I'll give you time to ask questions. Now, so that is one thing, the fact or the structure of the Marathas. When we say what are the factors which explain the failure of the Maratha state, it is the structure of the Maratha state itself that was partly responsible for the failure of Marathas to establish a pan-Indian empire despite having both the opportunity and the potential or the ability. So there were some weaknesses in the Maratha structure, and indirectly we are comparing it to other players like Mughals. Okay, so Mughals were a pan-Indian empire. देखिए, that is what was the question this year also in the mains examination, and we'll come to this, that Mughals were the pan-Indian empire up till 1700, till the time of Aurangzeb. Then 1800s onwards it is the British who are the pan-Indian empire. But in this intervening period of 100 years from 1700 to 1800, it is the Marathas who had the potential as well as the opportunity to become, but they did not. Why they did not? That can be explained partly from the structure of the Maratha state itself. So they can ask you a question on that. Another thing that they can ask you a question from here in the mains examination, and this is about the third battle of Panipat. They've already asked this question in the mains examination, that which is partly related to this, and that is about why so many battles were fought in Panipat. Okay, so we'll talk about that also. The third battle of Panipat, 1761, and its significance. Okay, that is what are the causes of the battle and the significance, what happened in the battle, etc. That also I'll tell you. Okay, now after this are the Anglo-Maratha wars, 3 wars, first, second and third. Okay, 1775 to 1782, 1803 to 1805, and 1817 to 1818. 19. So these are the three wars. Again, causes and the significance of these wars. Okay. So we'll talk about some of the treaties and the subsidiary alliance which is signed before the second war, Treaty of Bassein, etc. All of that. इसमें से क्या prelims में आ सकता है factual, वो भी मैं आपको बता दूंगा. That only the most important treaties here, that two treaties that you must remember about are the Treaty of Salabai, जो मैंने आपको बता दिया है पहले, partly, and we'll discuss it in more detail. The Treaty of Salabai was signed after the first war. Before the second war is signed another treaty, that is the Treaty of Bassein, with which they are entering into a subsidiary alliance with the British in 1802. Treaty तो और भी है यहाँ. Treaty of Purandar is there. There are many other treaties. लेकिन हमारे exam के लिए, see, one thing also is to be understood that we are not studying a history optional है ना. हम history पढ़ रहे GS में, so there is always a limit. आप geography भी optional भी पढ़ सकते हैं और GS में भी पढ़ सकते हैं. तो हमारा काम है वहीं तक रुक जाएं. जैसे एक किसी के दिमाग में सवाल है, सर व्हाट वाज द सोशियो इकोनॉमिक लाइफ ऑफ पीपल ड्यूरिंग 18th सेंचुरी. नहीं, हमको वो पढ़ना है तो हम ब्रिटिश में पढ़ेंगे. व्हाट इज द सोशियो इकोनॉमिक लाइफ ड्यूरिंग ब्रिटिश रूल इन इंडिया, नॉट ड्यूरिंग मराठा रूल. क्यों? क्योंकि अगर वो पढ़ना है आपने तो आप ऑप्शनल की तैयारी कर रहे हैं, इसकी तैयारी नहीं कर रहे. सो दैट इज दैट. नाउ these are the three main topics. Let's start firstly with the structure of the Maratha rule. Now, when we start with the structure of Maratha rule, one of the things as a background that you must know, and we'll write the timeline also for some of the major events there. Firstly, you must know some amount of background information. Shivaji was the one who started the formation of the Maratha Empire. It was Shivaji who died in 1680-81, that after the death of Shivaji, other Maratha rulers actually carried on the rule in the Maratha Empire. The Marathas to begin with were from a warrior clan. Okay, they were from a warrior clan, but this, though they were from warrior clans, they were actually mercenaries, in the sense that they could be recruited. They could be recruited for fighting wars on the side of any army, provided they were financially well compensated for it. Okay, that is what is mercenary. Right? Afghans also, for example, were mercenaries. That the Afghan invaders could also be recruited on either sides for fighting wars if they were paid a good financial remuneration for the same. So, और ऐसे mercenaries आज भी आपको बहुत सारे दिख जाएंगे. For example, there's the Blackwater Group. There are many such mercenaries which operate, provide services to US Army, etc. in West Asia, etc. Right? So, one of the things that is visible at this point of time is that the Marathas do not have a big, empire to begin with. Rather, it is Shivaji who carves out the empire during the rule of Aurangzeb. But Aurangzeb ultimately had managed to defeat the Marathas. Aurangzeb had ultimately managed to defeat the Marathas. And following Shivaji's death, the next ruler was Sambhaji. In 1681, after Shivaji's death, the next ruler was Sambhaji and then Rajaram. Okay? Both of them were Shivaji's son. Okay? So first came Sambhaji. After the death of 1681 to from 1681, firstly came Sambhaji, then came Rajaram. Okay? Now, it is in 1699 that you see the coming of that in 1699 is the coming of Rajaram, and after Rajaram's death, and Rajaram's death in 1699 is followed by the coming of another individual, which is Rajaram's son, and that is Shivaji the second. Shivaji the second was the grandson of Shivaji. अभी मैं लिखूंगा तो आपको clear हो जाएगा. अभी बस सुन लीजिए. लिखूंगा मैं, आप भी लिख लेना मेरे साथ. So Shivaji the second was the grandson of Shivaji, and he was the son of Rajaram. Okay. Now Shivaji the son was an infant who was of a very young age, and it is at this point of time Shivaji the second was in no position to rule, And the Maratha rule was also not very big because the Mughals had anyways captured most of the Deccan territories, including Maratha territories. It is Shivaji II, in his name, his mother, that is Tarabai, actually ruled. Tarabai ruled in the name of her infant son Shivaji II, and she is the one who is in charge till 1707. Okay, so in 1707 is who is dying? Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is dying in 1707 in the Mughal Empire. Now, as Aurangzeb dies in 1707, there is a very clear-cut realization in the Mughal Empire that the fall of Aurangzeb is going to be followed by a long succession dispute, as there were many potential rivals to the throne. And if the Mughal Empire is going to be weak at this point of time, involved in a number of succession disputes, it will give whom a chance to expand? Marathas, right? Because the Marathas have been restricted from any expansion by Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb is dying. Mughals are getting into a succession dispute, and the weakness of the Marathas will definitely be exploited by the weakness of the Mughals will be definitely be exploited by the Marathas. So, as the Mughals are dealing with the succession dispute in 1707, after the death of Aurangzeb, what do? They release Sahu. Sahu was the other grandson of Shivaji. Shivaji had two grandsons. One was Shivaji II and the other was Sahu. Sahu had been captured by Aurangzeb. Okay, Sahu had been captured by Aurangzeb, and following Aurangzeb's death, Sahu was released by the Mughals from jail. Sahu was released by the Mughals from jail intentionally. Why? With the intention of engineering a succession dispute even amongst the Marathas. That if we have a succession dispute to deal with, let them also have a succession dispute to deal with. So it's not that Indians do not have their own Game of Thrones. Okay. Given the opportunity, we have shown tremendous potential. Okay. So, there's one thing I have this deep fascination of saying in every class, is that Indians do a very shoddy job of making any movie on history. It has got no correlation with history. There another lady which has taken upon that mantle is going to be Kangana Ranaut, right? So I am rest assured, it is my prejudice against Bollywood. Can't make any historical movie. उसमें भी पता नहीं कुछ माँ प्यार angle यही सब चल रहा है, right? So that is there. If you look at Jodha Akbar, this is a classic example. I was just telling in the first class also, right? Whatever. उसके बाद तो मैंने देखा ही नहीं. So I watched Jodha Akbar with a lot of expectation that it would have some historical insight, something So Mohenjo-daro was once coming on TV, and then I saw this much, that he is reading something. We do not know the script of the Harappan civilization, but we know everything according to the movie. As is said about the Jodhabai and the Akbar relationship, we do not clearly know if there was somebody by the name of Jodhabai or who was Jodhabai. But Indian movie directors know everything, right? If you go to the Jodhabai's palace in Fatehpur Sikri, the Archaeological Survey of India has put up a clear board that this is popularly known as Jodhabai's palace. But who was Jodhabai, if there was somebody by the name of Jodhabai, is not clearly known. Yes, it is true that Akbar married the daughter of Maharaja of Amber, but it is also not clear at all that was her name Jodhabai also or not. In fact, there was a Portuguese princess that Akbar had married. There is a considerable amount of debate amongst historians that probably her name was Jodhabai. So, isliye, we should be very cautious with history. Now, the next issue. So, firstly, if you can write this much with me. Okay, we're making a timeline from 1680 onwards till 1760. Okay, first. So, in 1681, you see that Shivaji died. Following Shivaji's death, it is from 1681 to 1699. Firstly, it is Sambhaji and then Rajaram. Sambhaji was one son, Rajaram was the other son of Shivaji. Okay, they were the ones who were in power. Then in 1699 onwards, Shivaji the second, which was the son of Shivaji the son was the son of Rajaram, but Shivaji the second ruled, or onwards Shivaji the second, in the name of Shivaji the second, Tarabai ruled till 1707. In 1707, Aurangzeb is dying, right? Aurangzeb died in 1707. Following this, in 1707, Sahu, the other grandson of Shivaji, was released from jail to engineer a succession was released from jail by whom? By the Mughals, right? Yeah. So, to engineer a succession dispute within the Maratha Empire. Then, from 1707 to 1715, for the next 8 years, this plan worked. That there was a bitter succession dispute between Tarabai and Sahu. And in this contest between Tarabai and Sahu, ultimately in 1715, it is Sahu who emerges victorious. So in this succession dispute from 1707 to 1715, it is ultimately Sahu which emerged victorious in 1715. And in this long drawn out succession dispute, it was Balaji Vishwanath who was a key associate of Sahu, and later on goes on to become the Peshwa. Peshwa is actually a prime minister, just like the Wazir, who would be the close associate and the eyes and ears of the king. Similarly was the position of the Peshwa. This position of the Peshwa in the Maratha Empire went to Sahu, as Sahu did what? As Sahu became the king. So it's like Amit Shah became BJP president, as Modi ji became prime minister. So he is the Peshwa, right? So that is that. So in that context, basically what you see is that following Sahu's rise to the position of Maratha king, Balaji Vishwanath became a key, Balaji Vishwanath, a key associate became Balaji Vishwanath, a key associate, became the Peshwa. Okay. Now, it is important here that Balaji Vishwanath, as I told you, ऐसे याद रख लीजिए, is Amit Shah. So Amit Shah क्या है? Good electoral strategist, right? And in that context, what does Vishwanath do? Vishwanath is a key strategist, and he opens up negotiation with whom? With the Mughals. He opens up negotiations with the Mughals, and clearly this much was clear, that what was clear? that the Mughals are in 1715, have the Mughals settled their succession dispute? Yes or no? No, they have not settled their succession dispute. पीछे का पढ़ के आइए, आगे का नहीं पढ़ना है, पीछे का पढ़ते जाना है. Okay. So in 1719, I told you, it is in 1719 only that Muhammad Shah rises to the throne, right? Before that, in 1715, the succession dispute is not settled, right? So the Mughals clearly come to the realization, this realization is very clear and sharp within the Mughal Empire, that it cannot afford a direct military conflict with Marathas at this point of time. Why? Because of the financial crisis that they were in, the Jagirdari crisis, the financial crisis, also the political instability after the fall of Aurangzeb, and this was perhaps not a very right time at which they could afford a larger military conflict with the Marathas. And herein comes the complex nature of Maratha and Mughal relationship. In popular conception, in the Shiv Sena's worldview, let's put it this way, it is like that the Marathas are the enemies of the Mughals and the Mughals are out there to get the Marathas. जैसे जीवन में और कोई लक्ष्य नहीं है ना? So जीवन में बहुत लक्ष्य हैं. Mughals and Marathas के पहला लक्ष्य is to make your own life awesome. Okay. And to that extent, the Marathas are not, at this point of time are not engaging in any conflict with the Mughals. Rather, the Marathas' resurgence and their ability to solve the succession dispute is itself perceived as a threat by the Mughals, who are yet weak to pose any challenge and come out of their internal disputes. So the Mughals and Marathas enter into negotiation, and the Mughals agree to firstly recognize formally the rule of the Marathas. For the first time, Aurangzeb never even recognized Maratha rule. But after the death of Aurangzeb, Mughals are recognizing Maratha rule, okay, for the first time. Also, they said, what do the Marathas want? We will give them and let's avoid a war. So Marathas now are seeking what? Revenue, or a portion of the revenue. So basically, and this is something that has to be understood, it's a partly complex thing, is that what is happening is that the Mughals and the Marathas, they are engaging in a negotiation at this point of time, with which firstly the Mughals recognize the Maratha rule. Secondly, they said to the Marathas that what do you want? We are ready to share the revenue from the Malwa region and also from the Khandesh region in Gujarat. From the Malwa region in central India and from the Khandesh region in Gujarat, we are ready to share a part of the revenue. Meaning that they said that 1/4 of the revenue, we are ready to share it with the Marathas. So 1/4 of the revenue from these regions collected could be handed to the Marathas. In return, what will the Marathas do? The Marathas will not challenge the British, will not challenge the Mughal rule. The Marathas will not challenge the Mughal rule, and the Marathas and the rule will continue in the name of whom? Mughals. So the Malwa and the Khandesh region, 1/4 of the revenue will go to the Marathas, but in return the Marathas will neither attack nor will they, and the name also will continue in the name of the Mughals. So what is kya kar rahe hain? Mughals apni izzat bacha rahe hain. That is what they are doing. They are controlling, they are entering into a negotiation with the Marathas, something that was unthinkable in the time of Aurangzeb. Naam dabo diya Aurangzeb ka, right? So in that context, they are getting into a negotiation with the Marathas, and this is reflective of two things: the decline of Mughals and the rise of Marathas. Right? Otherwise, such a thing was unthinkable, that the Mughals could negotiate, that the Marathas could negotiate with Mughals. Dekhiye, when Aurangzeb, see, the point is the fun point. I like this very much, that Aurangzeb was the last major Mughal ruler, and every local Indian ruler that Indian politicians today crave about stood nothing a chance in front of Aurangzeb. Though Aurangzeb's imposition of jizya etc. is also something that is a controversial, and he broke temples etc. all of that is there. But Aurangzeb was also a very able military warrior, something that cannot be refuted in history. I mean, yes, impossible is nothing in today's India, where in the battle of Haldi Ghati, we can change history today, we have that confidence. But apart from that, if you look from a historical angle, then it is no doubt that when Aurangzeb talked to Shivaji, Shivaji was given an offer of becoming a military commander in Aurangzeb's army, and Shivaji accepted the offer. But then Shivaji was not happy with the status that he was getting. Shivaji perceived that he would get the largest Jagirdari under Aurangzeb, but that did not happen. He was given the Jagirdari of the size of which big Rajput leaders were also given. So Shivaji was unhappy at being treated like other Indian rulers. But so that is why he tried to escape, ultimately captured and killed. So the point is that from the time of Aurangzeb, the foremost Maratha ruler is ready to accept a subordinate status to Aurangzeb. That is the stature of Aurangzeb, and now has come the time. ये होता है नाम मिट्टी में मिला देना. Now has come the time where Mughals are ready to cede revenue from the region just to avoid a war with the Marathas. This also reflects the ability of the Marathas. ऐसे ही Mughals would not get ready to cede the revenue. It reflects the ability of the Marathas as well, that they are becoming a major challenge to the Mughals. Now this is what is called as Chauth. Okay, Chauth or 1/4. There is also something that's Sardeshmukhi. What is the difference between Chauth and Sardeshmukhi, and what is the similarity? Both are methods by which the Marathas demanded a share of the revenue. But Sardeshmukhi was an additional revenue or another 10% that they demanded from areas where the rule was recognized to be that of the Marathas. Sardeshmukhi, Sare Deshon ka Mukhiya. All those areas where the Marathas had direct control, or where they claimed that they were the rulers, from there they collected an additional 10% of tax. In addition to this 1/4 that they are already getting. Okay. So Sardeshmukhi, it was collected from areas which were recognized under the direct control of Marathas. Whereas Chauth was collected from areas which were under the direct as well as indirect control. What do we say here? This is all the area under the indirect control of Marathas. Why indirect control? Because they are getting the portion of the revenue. But the direct rule was that here of the Mughals. Okay. So this is the complex nature of relationship to begin with. Now this is something that starts from 1715. In 1719, Balaji Vishwanath goes and signs another deal with which this was extended further north. So what is happening? That the Maratha rule is expanding northwards, and some military and some conflicts also were there, but Maratha rule is expanding northwards. Okay, and it is expanding northwards, but the direct rule continues to be of the Mughals. It is the indirect rule of the Marathas which is expanding. Now what do you mean by, sir, indirect rule? Indirect rule kya kar rahe hain? Indirect meaning that in this area which was under their direct control, the Marathas maintained their constant presence of the army. The Marathas were responsible for the day-to-day administration, revenue collection, everything. Okay, so day-to-day administration, revenue collection, everything the Marathas were responsible. In territories which were under the direct control of Marathas. In territories which were under the indirect control, they only restricted themselves to getting 1/4 of the revenue. If 1/4 of the revenue was not paid on the time, then the Marathas would attack. Okay, that is all. Hafta vasuli. That's all that is happening here. Okay, so that is what is being done at this point of time. Now this reflects Maratha might, undoubtedly. That this reflects Maratha might in the region. Now what happens is, But there are big states. There are big states. Some big states are also there, like Bengal. And I told you 1720s onwards, Bengal is becoming autonomous, right? Then there are also big states like Hyderabad. Then also we'll talk about Awadh. These are big states. These are becoming autonomous by 1720s onwards. ये बोलते हैं हम नहीं सुनते मुगल किंग की. We are autonomous. Some of these states refuse to enter into Chauth and Sardeshmukhi agreements with Marathas. So now what did the Marathas did? We'll tell them who's the boss. Marathas started invading territories of Hyderabad, Bengal, Awadh. Bengal, tired of Maratha invasions in 1751, agreed to give Chauth from Bengal to agreed to give Chauth from the Bengal region to the Marathas. Also, even agreed to cede control of the portions of Odisha completely to Marathas. Okay. So this is again reflective of what? Maratha might. And again, this is a reflection that the Marathas are interested and happy with collecting revenue. If the Marathas can impose a military defeat on Bengal, forcing Bengal ultimately to part ways with 1/4 of the revenue, why not annex Bengal and take over direct political control of these regions? Though ultimately Marathas in 1751, by 1751, Marathas' influence is increasing in this region, so much so that even portions of Bengal and portions of Hyderabad, all of this they are threatening, to the extent that they almost reached close to Delhi. Okay. So in 1751 they also raided Awadh. In 1751 they raided Awadh also. Awadh did not grant them Chauth, so they raided Awadh in 1751. So what do you see? That by 1750s, the Maratha influence is at its peak. 1720s to 1760s, to be more precise, 1720 to 60, Maratha expansion has moved beyond the direct area of control in what is the Maratha territory to vast areas of north and central India, extending in the east up till Bengal. Okay, that is there. And this is all a reflection of the Maratha might. But the direct rule was restricted to what you see as the area in the red. But north and central region, they were more interested in collection of Chauth or Sardeshmukhi, depending from region to region. Okay. Now, this is also, and this is where you hear of the terms like Pindaris, right? The Pindaris were these raiders. The Marathas, when they raided other territories, they raided, looted, plundered, and destroyed local structures. These were the Pindaris or the looters. Okay, and this is something which is clearly visible at this point of time in a number of territories that they raided and looted. The Pindaris were also clearly visible. Now, what is there? Why is it that Marathas are not establishing a direct rule in areas beyond what you see as the Maratha territories in the region that they anyways had their control from the beginning? Why is it that they are not establishing direct control? They are only happy with indirect rule. Firstly, there is no intent. Anyways, they are mercenaries and fighters whose expertise is in fighting wars and gaining revenue. If they are getting a good agreement with which they get a constant supply of Chauth and Sardeshmukhi, then where is the responsibility of establishing administration? Where is the need of establishing administration? Also, if there was and there was no other military player or no other power which had the military prowess to challenge Marathas at this point of time. Mughals are declining. 1720s, Mughals are declining. The British are yet to establish themselves. It is only in 1760s that they established themselves in Bengal and Hyderabad. So 1720 to 60 किसका time है? Marathas का. तो Marathas ने, this is the honeymoon period of Marathas. Even their name itself is enough to get Chaut and Sardesh Mukhi, and they are vastly increasing their influence, and they are at their peak by 1760-61. It is only in 1760-61 that you see the third battle of Panipat. That we'll talk about later. In this period after 1719, you see 1719, after signing this Chaut agreement etc. for Malwa Khandesh region, Balaji Vishwanath dies. Okay? Balaji Vishwanath died and he was the Peshwa or the Prime Minister. But following Balaji Vishwanath's death, Balaji Vishwanath had made the position of Peshwa hereditary. Amit Shah, then Jay Shah. So, had made the position, please don't get offended if you are supporter of one party or the other, है ना, थोड़ा सा जीवन में मजा चलता रहना चाहिए, आपको जो करना है करिए, मेरे पीछे मत आइए क्लास के बाद, है ना. So that is, I am more concerned about my safety, है ना, so than anybody else. So 1720 to 1760, the Peshwaship is made hereditary. Okay, after you see that after Balaji Vishwanath made the position of Peshwa hereditary, and 1720 you see Bajirao becomes the Peshwa after the death of Vishwanath, his son Bajirao becomes the Peshwa, and after the death of 1720 to 1740 is Bajirao who is the Peshwa, and 1740 to 1760 is Balaji, 1740 to 1761 is Balaji Bajirao, then Balaji Bajirao becomes the Peshwa. This is also the golden age of Marathas, is also called the period of rule of Peshwas. Why it is called the period of rule of Peshwas? Because Bajirao and Balaji Bajirao, the Peshwa exercised real power after 1720. Why? Because in 1719 Vishwanath died, and in 1720 Sahu also died. So Sahu also, the king, Maratha king also died in 1720. The real locus of power now passed in the hands of Balaji Bajirao, who was an able military commander. He was an able military commander. I don't know which Bajirao Mastani is based on which of these characters. First, obviously, because he was an able military commander. Who makes a movie on a on a king who is not, you know, a able fighter, right? So, okay, that was predictable. Indians are so predictable, right? So, in the sense that Bajirao was an able military commander, but Balaji Bajirao was not as able a military commander, but he was also a good strategist. Okay, so both these were powerful Peshwas, and after the death of Sahu, the next kings, the Maratha kings who came, there were Maratha kings after Sahu also, but the real locus of power had passed in the position of Peshwas. And Bajirao and Balaji Bajirao both were powerful players, and it was under their rule that the Marathas' control expanded to include vast portions of north and central India. Okay, that is why it is called the golden age of the Marathas, which is also called as the period of Peshwas. Okay, again I am saying it does not mean that Maratha kings were not there. Maratha kings were there at this point of time also, but we do not study about them क्योंकि हमारे जीवन में नाम की कमी नहीं है, है ना. अभी आगे और बहुत सारे नाम आने हैं, रघुनाथ राव, नारायण राव, बाजीराव टू, you know, नाना फडनेस, बहुत नाम है. कम नाम रखें, जितने याद रहे वो बहुत है. Okay, so that is there. Now, why am I telling you this? Is because if you see, firstly, factors which facilitated the rise of Marathas. मैंने बोला they had the ability and the potential, right? They had the ability or potential and the opportunity. Opportunity is what? The power vacuum that is created in the subcontinent after the decline of Mughals and before the arrival of British. There is a power vacuum. There is nobody who can challenge them. So they had the opportunity. And this was the opportunity to expand their rule, which they did, and also probably to consolidate their rule. What do you mean by consolidation? I'll come to. But consolidation they did not do. Okay. What do you mean by consolidation? Is by establishing direct administrative structure and direct military presence and administrative structures in all regions under their control. देखिए इसका क्या मतलब है? Practical example. For example, wherever the Mughals expanded, the Mughals would establish their policing structure, the Mughals would establish their revenue collection structure and administrative structure. and position their troops in these regions, etc. That is how they would maintain a constant presence in the and consolidate their hold over any region which came under their control initially. But the Marathas did not do. They would neither station their army in every area under their control, nor would they collect revenue directly. They would take the portion of the revenue from this region, from the rulers themselves. Okay? On the basis of, and how would they know कि cheating नहीं हो रही है? How would they come to know? They would come to know from this on the basis of the past records of revenue collection data. They would see that more or less it has to be in that pattern. Okay? So that was there. Now, also they had the ability. They had the ability because the Marathas were able military warriors, and their ability, expertise was predominantly in guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare was something where their expertise lay very significantly. ये guerrilla warfare क्या होता है? छुप के वार करना. ठीक है, छुप के वार करना तो घात लगा के वार करना. Okay, so what is guerrilla warfare? Guerrilla warfare is a strategy which often uses an element of surprise to attack the opponent. But guerrilla warfare cannot happen in everywhere. Suppose you are standing there and I am standing here, there can be no guerrilla warfare in this room. Because the geography, the topography of the region, has to be suitable for guerrilla warfare. Often guerrilla warfare strategies are suitable in either thickly forested areas or in mountainous regions, etc., where you can hide. And because if you are the local individual and you have expertise in guerrilla warfare, by virtue of knowledge of local terrain and geography, you can hide in a thickly forested region and attack the opponent's army who has no prior experience of fighting in the region. So by virtue of knowledge of the local terrain, a suitable local terrain, and by virtue of experience, you can take on an opponent who has no prior experience of fighting in the region. Meaning in your region you are invincible. Because you have the numbers also, and more importantly than the numbers, you have the knowledge of the local terrain and you have the local advantage. जैसा होता है ना क्रिकेट में होम टर्फ, इंग्लैंड में मैंने सुना ऐसा कुछ हो रहा है हमारे साथ. I have not seen the match, but anyways I've just heard. So basically what do you see here in guerrilla warfare, and this is very important point actually. मैं इसको बड़ा डिटेल में इसलिए बात कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि हम थर्ड बैटल ऑफ पानीपत में बात करेंगे. Okay, that what you see is in guerrilla warfare, it also allows a smaller army to take on a bigger army. Even 1,000 soldiers who have expertise in guerrilla warfare and in a topography suitable can take on an army of 10,000 soldiers also. So even guerrilla warfare allows a smaller army to take on a bigger army. Also what guerrilla warfare uses is attacking the bigger, if the bigger adversary does not have the knowledge of the local terrain, a smaller army can firstly divide the big army into small blocks, okay, attack one section of the army, take its weapons and attack the other section of the army. So basically even if you are less well militarily equipped, you can take on a bigger army by stealing their weapons and attacking them with their weapons itself. That is why the Maoists, whenever they attack the CRPF, they try to loot the weapons, because then they can come back. The Maoists also use guerrilla warfare strategy. That is why they are concentrated in Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Telangana region, because this is a thickly forested region. Right? That is why, so they had expertise in guerrilla warfare, so Indian government said, kaise? We will also raise a battalion, which has, and Andhra Pradesh for example raised the Greyhounds, which was an exclusive battalion only to be engaged in guerrilla warfare. And we have a mountain warfare and counter-insurgency center in Kanker, in Chhattisgarh. देखिए ये जो फालतू बातें मैं बोल रहा हूँ ऐसे नहीं बोल रहा हूँ, इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ क्योंकि इसमें से कुछ ना कुछ कभी ना कभी आपके एग्जाम में काम आ सकता है. So a lot of knowledge in UPSC comes ऐसी इधर साइड से, उसमें से भी एक दो क्वेश्चन निकल जाते हैं प्रीलिम्स में. Okay, so that is there. So it is in this context that you see that the Marathas' expertise in guerrilla warfare, themselves being able military warrior, and if you know that the Malwa region, the Chambal Valley region is very suitable for guerrilla warfare. That is why you had Dakat in these, in the Chambal Kedaku, right? So this also reminds of what, you've seen that movie? Pan Singh Tomar, right? Irfan Khan objects to be called Dakat. Very clearly specifies, and this is not a small point. Actually, that is one exceptionally well-made movie. Two movies or three movies I'll suggest you. One is to watch Pansing Tomar. The other is to watch the movie Court. It's a Marathi movie and with English translation by Chinmay. It's a very good movie about untouchability in urban centers in India. And it's a very good movie, won many awards as well. It's a good movie. And Newton, exceptionally well made movie. Okay. So these are movies that you must watch. ये आप बोलेंगे सर आप क्या बकवास कर रहे हैं? ऐसे टॉपिक आया था 2014 essay paper topic was, is cinema a reflection of Indian society or can it be a agent of social change? Okay. So इसीलिए आप जब भी कुछ देखें तो अच्छा देखें, अच्छा सुने, अच्छा पढ़ें तो यूपीएससी में भी काम आए. So that is there. And in the Hindu etc. also articles keep coming from time to time on these kind of, whenever there's a popular depiction in cinema or art of any issue. So in that context, what you see here is that these are all the reasons for the ability and the opportunity of Mughal, of Maratha expansion till 1761. Is that much clear? Any doubts still here? Anything you have to ask? Clear? Okay, so you can firstly complete this and then we'll, move forward. I've given the exact map in the PowerPoint presentation for the Mughal extent during 1760s if you're interested. I just got the information that the presentation is not uploaded or what? Yes, sir. I'll get it uploaded today. After the class by 5:30 itself, I'll get it. So what is the plan for tomorrow? No, get up and watch the Prime Minister's speech. No. See, I'll tell you something interesting. 2014, the Prime Minister said something from Red Fort, which found no mention in 2015 speech. In 15 also, he said couple of things. Then in 16 also, he said couple of things. In 17 also, he said couple of things. Now it's going to be 18. It is very interesting to watch every speech of the Prime Minister, and one should watch these speeches. ऐसे ही देख लिया करिए, जीवन में वैसे भी आप कई चीजें बिना किसी काम के करते हैं, ये भी कर लीजिए. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, where they said that by 2019, Bharat will become Swachh. Okay, and in the sense, but a focus of that was on sanitation, right? A focus of this was on, there were many components of it, but one strong focus was sanitation and open defecation free sanitation, etc. And there have been some movements on it. Sanitation and Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, issues and challenges, very important topic for your examination view. राइट, तो प्राइम मिनिस्टर जो बोल रहे हैं उसमें से क्वेश्चन आने की संभावना है, तो आपको पता तो चलेगा कि क्या. सो इट्स नॉट दैट ही वन डे गेट्स अप एंड कि आज हाँ कुछ बोलना है तो चलो बोल देते हैं. इट्स अ वेरी वेल क्राफ्टेड स्पीचेस which reflects the government's policies, focus, etc. They also talked here that we will make toilets in every school by 2015. But 2015 speech found no mention of what happened. They said, how will we make toilets in every government school by 2015? Partly by cooperation with CSR activities, corporate social responsibility with private players. But 2015, there's no mention there. Then, for example, last year they talked about the Prime Minister feels the pain of the Baloch people. Okay, so what happened to that pain after that? We can find out in 2018. So there is no follow-up. Indian people also don't do any follow-up. Okay, we also don't ask कि अच्छा वो बोला था उसका भी आज क्या हो रहा है. Follow-up is not there. There's every new issue, no. Then now there's NRC. अगले साल कुछ और आ जाएगा, right? ऐसे ही चलता है. Now 1719, you write. Balaji Vishwanath secured Chauth and Sardeshmukhi from the Maratha, from the Mughals for certain territories in, secured a Chauth and Sardeshmukhi from Mughals for certain territories in the Malwa and Khandesh region in central India. No, that will talk separately. Right? That's not in the Malwa region. Right? 1720, you see that following Vishwanath's demise, Bajirao, that is the son of Balaji Vishwanath, became the Peshwa. In 1740, it is Balaji Bajirao who became the Peshwa till 1761. During 4 decades, of Peshwa rule, the Maratha, during 4 decades of Peshwa rule, the Maratha influence expanded vastly and constant Maratha raids forced even Bengal in 1751 to grant Chauth and the control of portions of Odisha region to Marathas. And they territorially threatened Awadh or Hyderabad as well. Okay, so that is there. Now, we'll write about their opportunity, ability, etc. all of that later. Now, one more thing, if you've written this much, please leave this page, please leave one page, okay, from here, because we will come to, from 1761 onwards later, we'll come to 1819. We'll complete this timeline here itself, okay. So, leave one page so that, because we'll complete this, I want it to be in one place, the whole timeline, because causes etc. we'll write separately, but timeline can stay in one place. It's easier to revise that. Now, the first thing that we are going to now talk about are what? This whole Maratha structure of administration. Now when we talk about the Maratha structure of administration, देखिए, political, again, political, economic, army, right? Social also, social is not that important here क्योंकि थोड़ा सा controversial हो जाता है, लेकिन social के बारे में हम बात नहीं करेंगे, लेकिन political, economic and army, their structure is something that we are interested in studying. Now, firstly talking about their political structure. See, the Marathas basically had the areas that the Maratha ruling structure was pretty similar to the Mughals. Okay, so just like the Mughals had their king, the Marathas also had their king. Just like below the Mughals, below the king was the Wazir, below the king here was the Peshwa. Now, the Peshwa also was a part of the wider Maratha nobility. Okay, Peshwa, just like the Wazir was a part of the wider Mughal nobility, the Peshwas were also a part of the wider Maratha nobility. And here there were a number of Maratha Sardars. Okay, so for example, there were the Holkars, there were the Sindhyas, there were the Bhonsles, there were the Gaekwad, there were many. Okay, we are only going to focus on three: Holkar, Sindhyas and Bhonsles. Okay, so these were also major Maratha Sardars. Just like you had regional governors for different regions, the Mughals, the Marathas also appointed Maratha Sardars for different regions. For example, the Holkars were appointed as the Maratha representatives in the region in and around what you see as Indore. The Sindhyas in the Malwa region also, again, which is the Gwalior region. Right? You have Vasundhara Raje. ये देखिए, रूलर्स का काम है रूल करना, चाहे वो बीजेपी में हो चाहे वो कांग्रेस. एक भाई इधर बहन उधर. So एकदम सही है. So basically, so the Holkars in Indore, the Sindhyas in Gwalior. Okay. Now, if you see, or the Bhonsles in and around Pune, yeah, Nagpur, Satara, Pune region. Basically, even in and around Pune, the Bhonsles had a considerable influence. Now, basically, what were their responsibilities? Say, for example, Holkars or Sindhyas. They were the ones who were the eyes and ears of the Maratha king in the region. They were the ones under whom a Maratha contingent was maintained in these regions. A Maratha, basically, a unit of Maratha soldiers was maintained in this region. This is how the Marathas maintained the influence in the region. And whatever is happening, or whatever are the local developments which are happening, or whatever is the revenue to be collected by the region, from this region, overseeing that was the responsibility of these Maratha Sardars. Meaning that these Maratha Sardars are also like whom? Like big Jagirdars. Right? Like big Jagirdars. They're not like small Jagirdars, but they're like big Jagirdars. They do not have the they're not exactly like Jagirdars, because their responsibility is not to collect revenue. Their responsibility is only to oversee, the collection of revenue from the region. And these Maratha Sardars also were powerful entities in themselves. They maintained the army, the standing army of the Marathas in these regions. They also oversaw what portion of revenue came to the Marathas from these regions. And it was important for the Peshwa to keep a check on the Maratha Sardars, because once you become powerful, what can you do? You can become autonomous, right? So we will say that as long as there was a strong Peshwa, he could keep the Maratha Sardars together. He could keep the Maratha Sardars in check and keep them together. But when Peshwaship became weak, then rather than being controlled by the Peshwa, the Maratha Sardars wanted to control the Peshwa. ये बड़ी simple सी. जब तक Aurangzeb was strong, he kept Mughal nobles under his check. But as following Aurangzeb's death, what happens? You see that the Mughal nobles want to control the king. कौन कहता है धर्म से कुछ बदलता है? कुछ नहीं. Power is the biggest religion, in my view. जरूरी नहीं है आपका view. Difference of view is appreciated. So basically, the Maratha Sardars had the propensity to. The Maratha Sardars were themselves powerful, but they were kept together by a powerful position of a Peshwaship and the Peshwaship of Bajirao and Balaji Bajirao. We will see that as Balaji Bajirao dies in 1761, these Peshwas now become autonomous. These Peshwas now become autonomous because of two reasons. Firstly, by 1760s, Peshwa, by 1761, Peshwa is going. Bajirao too is going, who was a strong, Balaji Bajirao is going, who was a strong Peshwa. The second reason is that the Mughal threat is completely disappearing. The Mughal threat was already became very weak after Aurangzeb, but in 1760 what is happening? The British are imposing a defeat. In 1763-64, the British are imposing a defeat on the central Mughal ruler, Bengal as well as Awadh, in the battle of Buxar, right? So the Mughal threat is completely disappearing. So if there is a complete Mughal threat is disappearing and there is no possibility of a Mughal revival anymore, then why should they stick around? देखिए unity जो है, it is often directed against the adversary. Maratha Sardars were united together till the moment that there was a strong Peshwa, until they feared that the Mughals may revive themselves sooner or later. So if the Mughals revive themselves sooner or later, then the Marathas will have a serious problem. But given once the threat of Mughal revival completely vanished and Peshwaship became weak, Maratha Sardars are more interested in asserting their own autonomy. And this we will see later, that now this becomes a situation where Maratha Sardars are fighting amongst themselves to appoint the next Peshwa, to control the Peshwa. Just like there was factionalism in the Mughal court between the Irani, Turani and the Hindustani faction, there is the fight between the Holkars, the Sindhyas and the Bhosles over the appointment of the Peshwa. Okay? So just like there was factionalism in the Mughal court, there is also factionalism in the Maratha court. That is one point that I wanted to explain. Usko samjhane ke liye I had to give this much context. Now, in this, so this is in one way where the Marathas are similar to the Mughal or different? Similar. Similar, so in the political structure they are similar. In the economic structure, also just like the Mughal system was of the Jagirdari, here is the Saranjami system. The Jagirdari system involved what? Revenue collection and administrative responsibilities fused into one. Here it is the Saranjami system. The Saranjami system applied to areas under the direct control of the Marathas, not under areas where they had a indirect control. In areas where they had the indirect control, there is no role for the Saranjami system. In areas where they had the direct control, they had the Saranjami system, which is similar to the Jagirdari system. They just have a different nomenclature for the same. Why? Because देखिए मराठा ज़्यादा दिमाग वहाँ नहीं लगाना. In the sense that whatever local structures of revenue collection had continued from before, they largely continued with the same. Areas under direct control, Saranjami system, नाम बदल दिया, Jagirdari से Saranjami. In areas under indirect control, just take a portion of the revenue, chillax. You are the undefeatable military power. क्या करना है? Petty issues से deal करके day-to-day administration. So one thing is that just like the Mughals, the Marathas also had the Saranjami system. And just like the Mughal, the Jagirdari system had economic, or the Jagirdari system had underlying problems, so did the Saranjami system. Mughals, did they ever take an interest in actively increasing agricultural productivity? No. If the Mughals have not taken, the Marathas have no interest in increasing agricultural productivity. Why? Because हमको तो अपना revenue मिल रहा है. That is all that we are interested in. None of these 18th century rulers in India were far-sighted enough to actively invest to increase agricultural productivity. And they have perfected the art of revenue collection one step further by even plundering territories, right? So, as long as revenue was being generated through Chauth, Sardeshmukhi or by plundering territories, and the Marathas were a significant military power, they felt no need to introduce any urgent economic reforms or to increase agricultural productivity. तो वो भी नहीं किया. So neither in economic structure nor in political structure, the Marathas are very different from the Mughals. In the army, they have expertise in guerrilla warfare, right? And this is also something which enables their expansion. So आप बोलेंगे कि sir, अगर Marathas were similar to Mughals, they also suffered from so many weaknesses, then how could Marathas expand? Because they had the opportunity. There is no major challenger to Marathas. There is no major challenger to Marathas. The Marathas solved their succession dispute. They have a strong Peshwaship, and the Mughals are already on the decline. So given the power vacuum, given their expertise in guerrilla warfare, they managed to expand. However, even though they managed to expand, they never consolidated their rule. They never consolidated their rule, and they failed to consolidate their rule, and their conquest would rarely go beyond the collection of Chauth and Sardeshmukhi. And this was a weakness. The failure to consolidate the rule costed them heavily. The failure to consolidate the rule costed them heavily during the third battle of, and it costed them heavily, that we'll discuss later, okay, but it did cost them. Also, in the political structure, we use a term that it was a confederal structure. After 1761, confederal structure. देखिए भारी शब्द शेखर बंदोपाध्याय uses. More so prominently after, so basically, firstly, you should understand what is confederal. देखिए एक होता है unitary state, where basically there is only one government and that is central government. When you have both central government and state governments, and both of them are equal, have equal powers, then that is federalism. Confederalism is where the provinces had larger powers and the center was loose or weak, or most powers are with the provinces and only few powers are with the center. That is confederacy, confederalism. Okay. So basically, if you put them on a spectrum, you have a unitary state, you have a federal, and you have a confederal. The confederal state is where the states or provinces are more powerful than the center. Here the state and center are equally powerful. Okay. Now, why am I telling you this? Is that the Maratha Sardars were already there. The Scindias, the Holkars, the Bhosles. So they were already powerful. So it was always federal, and it always became confederal, especially after 1760. So as long as वो ये उसी बात को और political science की या technical jargon में कहने का तरीका है, that ultimately that the Maratha Sardars became more autonomous and Maratha rule became more and more confederal in nature, especially after 1760s. So is this a centralized structure or a decentralized structure? Decentralized. So this is also a feature of the Maratha ruling structure. So despite having the opportunity and the potential, the Marathas failed to modernize themselves into a modern state, either politically or economically or militarily also. In military, they had expertise in guerrilla warfare, but they never developed an expertise in warfare in planes. And we'll talk about that in greater detail. Secondly, they never focused on military modernization with introduction of new technologies, as was witnessed in Mysore. So even there was no major focus on military modernization, there is no major focus on increasing economic productivity. The political structure is confederal in nature, and the military expertise is limited only to guerrilla warfare, which is not suitable for the planes. So despite having the ability and the opportunity in the given power vacuum in the subcontinent region during the 18th century, the Mughals, the Marathas expanded but failed to consolidate their rule, and their weaknesses were exposed following the third battle of Panipat, in which they suffered a crushing defeat. And that is what explains the fall of the शांति. कहाँ जाएंगे? या तो वहाँ जाएंगे दूसरे कमरे में, या 5 मिनट बाद चले जाइए. Are you in a hurry? So please enjoy the long weekend. है ना? In Indians, see, I will leave you just with one thought for today, and we'll write this in the next class. Indians are so overworked a society that when you have voting day, that is long weekend. When you have 15th August, that is long weekend. When you have 26th January, that is also long weekend. थोड़ा सा 1-2 घंटा ऐसी निकाल लीजिएगा, आपकी पढ़ाई में भी काम आ जाएगा, और कल देख लीजिएगा स्पीच, है ना? It would be interesting to watch also. I am looking forward to it. Okay, thank you.